Let's be honest. New Yorkers will stand in line for a cronut in a snowstorm, fight over bagels in a blackout, and keep jogging through Central Park during a thunderstorm with the casual indifference of Roman emperors watching a flood. But what happens when New York's civic pride meets Mother Nature's microwave setting? Welcome to What If Horizons, where we sip iced coffee while watching civilization unravel one unprecedented headline at a time. Today, we are not just talking about another summer heat wave. We are talking about a potential civic meltdown, both literal and figurative. Temperatures in New York City are expected to skyrocket to 100 degrees Fahrenheit this week, right on cue for day one of the mayoral primary election. Because nothing screams democracy like waiting 2 hours to vote in a church basement with no ventilation, sweating through your socks while holding your nose to pick a candidate. So, what happens if this isn't just an uncomfortable Tuesday, but a perfect storm of public health failure, voter suppression, and municipal chaos? What if the Big Apple starts to cook, and it's not just the pizza? Strap in, grab your reusable water bottle, and maybe a portable fan, because this is the story of what happens when New York democracy goes into heat stroke. Let's set the stage. The thermostat is climbing faster than a midtown rent hike, and New York City is on the verge of breaking a record set in 1888, when people still wore wool suits to the beach and thought cholera was just part of the summer fun. Forecasts predict a high of 97 degrees on Monday and a full triple-digit meltdown by Tuesday, the exact day New Yorkers are supposed to venture out and participate in that noble democratic ritual known as the primary election. Because what better way to test your commitment to civic duty than choosing between electoral irrelevance and heat exhaustion? And this is not just a sweaty inconvenience. Meteorologists, public health officials, and anyone who has ever tried to ride the subway in July are warning that the sudden spike in temperature will hit residents hard, especially those unacclimated to the heat, which includes, well, everyone not already commuting inside a rotisserie chicken. It's the city's first official heat wave of 2025. And like any good disaster, it comes with side characters, blackouts, overwhelmed emergency rooms, and the reappearance of those brave souls who wear long sleeves in the summer because they're used to it. Already, over 500 people in New York die each year from heat-related causes. That number doesn't just come from people collapsing on the sidewalk. It includes the elderly in unair-conditioned apartments, the chronically ill, and folks in underserved neighborhoods where a working fan is considered a luxury, and central air might as well be science fiction. So, as the temperature rises and the polls open, we ask a question no one put on the ballot. What if this heat wave isn't just a weather anomaly, but the first domino in a political, social, and medical collapse? Coming up next, why extreme heat is deadlier than you think, and who pays the price when the mercury climbs. Let's talk about heat. Not, oh, it's sunny today heat. Not grab an iced coffee heat. We're talking about the slow-roasting, lung-drying, street-shimmering kind of heat that turns pavement into griddles and public buses into rolling sweat lodges. The kind of heat that doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it quietly kills. In New York City, over 500 people die each year from heat-related causes. That might surprise you, since these deaths don't come with sirens or CNN alerts. Most are classified under terms like exacerbated cardiac failure or complications from chronic respiratory illness. But the trigger? Unrelenting, suffocating heat. Only a handful, usually 5 or 6 each year, are directly listed as heat stroke deaths. The rest are stealth casualties. Elderly residents in fifth-floor walk-ups with no air conditioning. Low-income families who ration electricity and try to survive the swelter with wet towels and prayer. People with chronic illnesses, forced to choose between staying indoors or reaching an overheated clinic with no reliable transit. And it's not just random. The most heat-vulnerable communities are overwhelmingly black, brown, and low-income. These are the same neighborhoods with fewer trees, less green space, more concrete, and older housing stock. Cooling is a privilege. Survival, a political calculation. Add to that the fact that public cooling centers are often underfunded, under-advertised, and sometimes just locked. Congratulations, we've reinvented the concept of bring your own breeze. Now, stack all of this onto Election Day. Imagine heat stroke victims in line at polling stations. Volunteers collapsing in gyms with broken air conditioning. Overloaded hospitals juggling patients suffering from dehydration and heat stress. The temperature isn't just rising. It's exposing every fault line in the city's health, infrastructure, and democracy. Up next, what happens when a health crisis meets election day, and both start to fail at the same time? Picture this. It's Tuesday morning, the first day of the mayoral primary. The city is already baking at 93 degrees by 10 a.m., and meteorologists gleefully inform you that we're heading toward triple digits by noon. It's the kind of weather that wilts flowers, fries tempers, and turns campaign volunteers into puddles with laminated lanyards. Polling places open. Voters trickle in. Elderly residents clutching water bottles, moms with strollers, workers in sweat-stained uniforms stopping by before their shifts. The line outside a high school in the Bronx stretches down a block. Then someone faints. Then another. Paramedics arrive, but there's a backlog. The 911 system is slammed across the city, not just for voting lines, but for heat strokes in public parks, for breathing problems in apartment buildings where the ACs have conked out, for cardiac arrests in overheated subway cars. Suddenly, 3 polling sites in Queens shut down due to environmental conditions. Translated, they were too hot to function and too dangerous to keep open. Machines overheat. Volunteers leave. The Board of Elections shrugs. There's no protocol for heat apocalypse. Meanwhile, power outages start flickering through parts of Brooklyn and Harlem. Grid strain, say the experts. But for voters who now can't access elevators, fans, or even light to see their ballots, it's just chaos. So try to stay. Others give up. In the afternoon, the media storms in. Cable news drones hover above shuttered polling sites. Social media is ablaze. Hashtags trend, melt the vote, hot mess NYC, democracy on fire. By evening, voter turnout is at historic lows, but not across the board. Wealthier districts with indoor polling sites and backup generators report steady numbers. Poorer neighborhoods? Disenfranchised by thermodynamics. Civil rights groups file emergency legal petitions. Candidates cry foul, some claiming climate voter suppression, others demanding the vote be extended or invalidated entirely. And hovering over it all, a city struggling to breathe, a democracy stumbling in flip-flops, and a forecast calling for another scorcher tomorrow. Coming up next, the deeper consequences for governance and democracy when elections melt down in real time. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter. What happens when democracy meets dehydration? The mayoral primary was already shaping up to be contentious, with razor-thin margins expected between progressives, moderates, and that one billionaire tech guy who insists he's not running for attention. But now, thanks to the inferno-level temperatures and chaotic polling conditions, the election is no longer just a political battle. It's a legitimacy crisis. First, the accusations fly. Candidates whose districts were hardest hit by the heat accuse the Board of Elections of negligence. Lawsuits are filed before the ballots are even fully counted. Civil rights lawyers show up on MSNBC looking like they haven't slept in days, waving affidavits and pointing to graphs of voter suppression by thermostat. Meanwhile, Twitter, and by Twitter, we now mean the social consciousness of America, erupts into tribal warfare. Some demand the entire election be thrown out. Others say the results stand. It's not our fault you didn't bring an umbrella and a camelback. News anchors debate whether this was a freak climate event or the new normal. Spoiler alert, it's both. In City Hall, officials try to downplay the fiasco. Press conferences are held inside heavily air-conditioned rooms. A deputy mayor claims the response was robust, even as another cooling center goes offline due to power failure. The mayor himself, term-limited, sunburned, and visibly sweating, gives a speech thanking New Yorkers for their resilience, which roughly translates to, "Please don't riot." But the damage is done. Faith in the city's ability to hold a fair election under climate stress is shaken. Advocacy groups warn this won't be the last time. With climate change now shaping everything from school closures to subway schedules, it's only a matter of time before extreme weather becomes a recurring third party in every election. And then there's the political fallout. If a candidate wins under these conditions, is their mandate real? Or is it heatwave certified? Coming up next, we dig into the human cost, the neighborhoods hit hardest, the hospitals overrun, and how the heatwave revealed long-standing public health inequalities hiding in plain sight. So let's walk through the fallout not just for elections, but for bodies, neighborhoods, and broken systems that have long been running too hot. While campaign operatives are arguing over ballot boxes in emergency rooms across the city, the real crisis is unfolding. Stretchers fill the hallways. Triage tents go up in hospital parking lots. The phrase heat exhaustion becomes so common it trends higher than any candidate's name on search engines. But this isn't happening evenly across the 5 boroughs. Not even close. In wealthy neighborhoods, folks retreat indoors, crank up their air conditioning, order electrolyte-infused smoothies, and post TikToks complaining about sweat. Meanwhile, in parts of the Bronx and Brownsville, seniors are collapsing in buildings with broken elevators and no ventilation. Families crowd into hot apartments with no AC, not because they forgot to turn it on, but because they never had it to begin with. It's called the urban heat island effect, and no, it's not a new reality show. It's the deadly truth that low-income neighborhoods absorb more heat thanks to fewer trees, more pavement, and crumbling infrastructure. Combine that with higher rates of chronic illness, less access to health care, and decades of disinvestment, and you've got a recipe for disaster that doesn't need 100 degrees. It just needs indifference. EMS workers are pushed to their limits. Calls skyrocket. Response times lag. One EMT describes it as like COVID, but with sunburns. And just like with the pandemic, the inequalities show up fast and furious. Cooling centers are underfunded, understaffed, and in some areas, locked when people arrive. Meanwhile, city officials issue carefully worded press releases like stay indoors, stay hydrated, and avoid strenuous activity, as if that's an option for a single mother trying to get to work while her kid wilts at a polling place turned sauna. Public health experts start calling the heat wave a mass casualty event in slow motion. Epidemiologists on cable news warn that deaths from heat aren't always recorded as heat-related. Heart attacks, kidney failures, strokes, many triggered or worsened by heat, don't show up in official stats, which means this crisis is bigger, deadlier, and more invisible than it seems. And yet, somehow, this city, this glorious chaos machine, keeps stumbling forward. The trains mostly run. The pizza never stops. But the question remains, is this the heat wave that finally forces a reckoning with climate inequality? Or just another round in a losing game of political whack-a-mole? Next up, how the city scrambles to adapt, what emergency actions work, which ones flop, and whether it's even possible to hold an election and save lives at the same time. Can New York City outmaneuver its own melting point? Or are we just fanning ourselves with bureaucracy? Let's talk mitigation, adaptation, that glorious government scramble where half measures meet full-scale panic. By mid-morning Tuesday, City Hall finally kicks into gear. Press conferences bloom like summer weeds. The mayor announces Operation Heat Shield, a bold name for a plan that includes opening more cooling centers, deploying mobile water trucks, and encouraging people to hydrate responsibly, which sounds like something your aunt might yell during brunch. City agencies attempt heroics on tight timelines. Parks and Rec repurposes community centers into climate shelters. The NYPD delivers cases of bottled water to voting sites where volunteers are beginning to resemble overcooked rotisserie chickens. And in a truly innovative twist, one Manhattan precinct opens a pop-up chill tent sponsored by a corporate soda brand. It is immediately overrun by both voters and campaign volunteers, all seeking salvation in the form of branded misting fans. Public libraries become sanctuaries. Buses idle with AC blasting as emergency respite units. But the question still lingers, is it enough? Election officials scramble to adapt. New directives are issued, polling hours extended into the cooler evening. Portable air conditioners rush to key locations. Free bottled water at the polls, though not all candidates get equal label placement. In some areas, officials propose drive-through voting, fast food meets democracy, but traffic jams and overheating engines make it a logistical mess. A pilot program for mobile voting vans stalls when 2 of them break down on the FDR. One explodes, not from heat, but from bureaucratic overload. Meanwhile, activists call for a postponement of the primary, demanding the governor declare a heat emergency and delay the vote. Legal scholars argue over constitutional precedents, citing a case from 1918 when a flu outbreak postponed elections. Twitter lawyers claim that if Beyoncé concerts can be rescheduled due to weather, surely democracy can too. Still, the vote rolls on. Because if there's one thing more immovable than the heat dome hanging over Manhattan, it's New York's political calendar. And in the background of it all, a quieter conversation begins. What does long-term adaptation look like? Urban planners and climate scientists, once relegated to TED Talks and obscure panels, are suddenly everywhere. They're talking green roofs, reflective pavement, reforestation, and zoning reform. There's renewed urgency for policies that have sat on shelves for decades, gathering metaphorical and now literal dust. But will any of that matter if the city keeps reacting instead of preparing? Coming up next, the existential what if we've already crossed the line where climate starts rewriting our political process? Let's dive into the big one, the what if moment. What if this is not a one-off? What if New York City's decision to proceed with the mayoral primary in the middle of a record-shattering heat wave turns out to be the prototype for a new era, where climate disasters don't just disrupt voting logistics, but rewrite the entire rulebook of democratic engagement? Imagine this becoming the norm. July primaries in Arizona are postponed due to tarmac melting under polling stations. August elections in Louisiana are rescheduled after the AC in 60% of the polling locations gives out mid-vote. In Florida, election officials wear cooling vests and voters are given electrolyte popsicles with party-neutral wrappers. But back to New York, the consequences of holding the election in brutal heat are immediate and bruising. Lawsuits are filed the next morning claiming climate-based voter suppression. Some neighborhoods reported polling station closures by noon. Others suffered hours-long lines in direct sun. A candidate from the Bronx tweets that the sun is now part of the GOP, prompting a rapid response from the Weather Service denying political affiliation. Turnout drops dramatically in key districts. And while some campaigns celebrate their ability to mobilize under fire, others claim they were iced out, figuratively, of course, since the city had run out of literal ice. And yet, there's a deeper signal here, pulsing underneath the sweat and civic dysfunction. Climate is no longer a future threat. It's a current constitutional challenge. This isn't just about hotter summers. It's about whether our democratic institutions can function when the infrastructure supporting them is cracking, not under political pressure, but under UV rays and rising dew points. Is voting a right if the conditions to exercise it are physically unsafe? Should elections be rescheduled when heat indices reach levels considered hazardous to human health? And who decides when a heat wave becomes an electoral emergency? The silence from federal authorities is deafening. There's no national policy, no playbook, just a patchwork of municipal coping mechanisms and a lot of crossed fingers. Meanwhile, climate scientists, exhausted from shouting into the void for the last 20 years, are finally being called to brief city councils and election boards. They explain that once in a century, heat waves now happen once every 3 years, and that today's emergency is tomorrow's baseline. So, what if this election becomes the case study in what not to do? What if New York's failure to adapt on time becomes the wake-up call for national electoral reform? Heat thresholds, remote voting expansions, climate-resilient polling stations. Or worse, what if nothing changes? What if this was our dress rehearsal for democracy under climate collapse, and we forgot our lines, fainted under the lights, and left the theater on fire? Coming up next, we wrap up the story and ask you, the listener, how hot is too hot to vote? And what happens when your polling place becomes a public sauna? And here we are panting, parched, and politically perplexed at the wrap-up of this scorching journey. New York City's heat wave wasn't just a meteorological event. It was a stress test for democracy, equity, and emergency planning all rolled into one molten ball of civic chaos. Voters dodged heat stroke, volunteers begged for fans, and political campaigns found themselves calculating turnout not by zip code, but by thermal index. At its core, this wasn't just a local governance failure. It was a snapshot of how climate change is no longer a background actor. It's now a co-director of public life, rewriting schedules, redrawing turnout maps, and rewriting the rules of electoral engagement. And the stakes? Let's not be coy. This goes far beyond New York. Cities across the globe are waking up to a brutal truth. Public infrastructure, electoral logistics, and basic health systems were not built for 21st century heat. And if nothing changes, every election season could become a casualty of rising temperatures. So we must ask, should democracy bend to the climate, or should it evolve to withstand it? Can we afford to keep pretending that extreme weather is a minor inconvenience when it's clearly acting as a political disruptor? What would it take for us to build a voting system that works at 100 degrees Fahrenheit with a power outage and an ambulance shortage? Maybe it starts with smarter urban planning. Maybe it means mobile polling stations with solar-powered AC and bottled water instead of broken promises. Or maybe, just maybe, it means we finally treat voting like a vital health service. Protected, prioritized, and climate-proofed. So what do you think? Should we reschedule elections to protect public health? Should heat emergencies automatically trigger voting accommodations? Or do we continue voting through sweat, smoke, and sirens because, well, democracy is supposed to be hard? We want to hear from you. Leave a comment, send a voice message, or mail us a postcard chilled in a portable fridge. And coming up next on What If Horizons. What if rural communities across the U.S. begin to secede and protest over wildfires, climate migration, and urban neglect? Until then, hydrate, vote early, and keep asking the questions no one else wants to sweat over.